there's some movement now in the hush money trial. For the third time, the Trump team has asked Judge Juan Merchan to recuse himself, and for the third time, Merchan says, no, you haven't presented any new compelling argument as to why I should step down, and so I'm not. And then today I heard that Trump is asking to delay the sentencing in this hush money case, which was set for September 18th, I think, until after the 2024 election. It seems like all these cases keep getting pushed back because of the Supreme Court immunity ruling. What's happening?
Well, this case, you'll remember, got delayed about a year, and people thought this was not going to be the one that ended up going to trial first. But with the 3 Trump-appointed justices on the Supreme Court taking, and many people think delaying, and then ruling incorrectly in the presidential immunity case, you end up with that case in Washington, D.C., federal court not going to trial quickly. You end up with a case down in Mar-A-Lago being like booted down the road, it looks like, by a judge who just, doesn't want to expedite it, or even worse, wants to slow it down, not rule on many motions that are pending that it seems like that Judge Cannon down there in the Southern District of Florida could have ruled on. And then you had the fiasco in Atlanta with the prosecutor down there and the special prosecutor being removed, and then this whole issue in the appellate court. So lo and behold, the one in New York City went to trial first. Although it's, on these older charges. We're having a little bit of feedback, by the way, here. And so he's actually delayed it quite a bit. Trump himself, he asked for some delays. He got some discovery he claimed late. That was a fair request for a slight delay. Then the case went to trial over the summer, early summer, you'll recall. And then he got found guilty, by all 12 jurors beyond a reasonable doubt. And so during all that time, he's tried to recuse the judge, Merchan, there, saying that Merchan actually had a conflict of interest, that his daughter works for a Democratic or political firm. So now the argument, having lost that several times, and also having lost that in the appellate courts in New York, Trump's latest argument is that, well, with Harris going to be the nominee, the daughter works for Harris. Well, the daughter also worked for Biden, worked for Democratic organizations. It's nothing but a make-weight argument. It doesn't really add anything to what they're saying there. And so that was denied. And the judge was a little bit upset. But, what can he do? He sanctioned Trump some money before. He disparaged Trump's lawyers. But, Trump's lawyers are being paid a huge amount of money. From their point of view, being disparaged a little bit by the judge. That's one of the least of the things that happens to them in representing Trump with that huge amount of money that they're making. The other one about trying to delay his sentencing, that's that he wants to brief this issue of presidential immunity. He claims that presidential immunity is somehow implicated in this case. It's important for your viewers to remember that he could have brought that presidential immunity case in that New York State court. He could have said, it violates my constitutional rights everywhere, in a federal court and in a state court, not to have this presidential immunity argument recognized and validated. He did not make that argument. He sat on it. He sandbagged it. His lawyers brought it up at the last minute. And the judge in New York said, I have a briefing schedule. You're very well aware of it. And you didn't file any briefs on this issue within the briefing schedule. You're just trying to delay things. And so he denied it, I think, on the merits, and also because it was basically brought for delay. Now their argument why the sentencing should be delayed is, number one, they want to brief this issue more now that the Supreme Court has ruled. He gave them some time. You'll recall there was a brief delay so they could brief this issue. The judge is going to say it's been fully briefed. I'm ready to rule. And I think he's going to say that even the broadest reading of what the U.S. Supreme Court did in the presidential immunity case doesn't knock this case out. The facts of it were, this is the hush money case. This is the Stormy Daniels. This is the one that's basically done before he ever becomes president.
Sure.
What he does while he's president is to write some checks in the Oval Office. Writing some checks for a personal debt, for a personal matter that happened before you were ever the president. does not, you could see where it doesn't implicate even that ruling. It's not an official act to go write in the White House a check for something that happened before you were president
Sure.
about something personal. So he's going to rule that that is not a basis to delay the sentencing. I think he's going to sentence him in the middle of September, but I don't think he's going to get prison time or even very restrictive home detention, because I think that would be viewed, given the timing, the way it worked out, the campaign, that would be viewed as presidential, as what does he call it? Election interference. I think it would be. Anything that would really restrict him from campaigning at this point, right? It's just the way it is. People who want to see him go to jail and think that he well merits going to jail, and he's delayed it to exactly this point. And why should he benefit from the delay? If you want to look at it that way, he's going to benefit from the delay. He's not going to get locked up or restricted at his sentencing in the middle of September in the New York case.
Well, if they do delay sentencing, because the way it's shaking out now is the presidential debate is September 10th. The judge will rule on immunity in the hush money case, whether presidential immunity is applicable, on the 16th. The sentencing's on the 18th. And so all of these things are happening for Trump kind of back to back. And I guess one could argue that having a sentencing as the presidential election is so close could sway and influence voters. So perhaps to avoid that whole argument, you schedule it for the day after the election or the week after the election. I don't know what makes sense, or whether there's even any thought process into when the election is at all, that the two things are completely separate.
I think the judge is going to feel like Trump has really made his own bed on this one. If these had really been unavoidable continuances, that would be one thing. But Trump tried to delay this case. It's true that the government delayed this case, asked for the continuances several times. But I just think that the judge is going to feel like, especially if he's not going to send him to either prison or send him to restrictive home confinement, I think that the judge will think, you know what, I'm just going to get on with it. He was found guilty by the jury. I've denied all of his motions. Okay, so he just got sentenced to some term of probation and let's say a large fine. How am I really interfering with the election? And Trump made his own bed by this timing was largely a product, not entirely, but largely a product of Trump asking for delays. And so here we are. By the way, if he were to get prison time, or even very restrictive home detention, I think that would immediately be appealed. And I think that they would at least stay, if the judge didn't, the appellate court in New York would at least stay the start of either the very restrictive home detention or him being locked up, because the appellate court, I think, would say that the way it worked out, no matter whose fault it is election interference. If you really were going to remand him to jail or lock him up, or restrict him to not leaving Mar-A-Lago, Trump would play it for all it's worth. I just don't think, having followed a lot of these cases very closely, Kim, as you have, I don't think that's the way it's going to shake out. But I do think he's going to say this is the day for sentencing. There is some chance, though, that he would move it to the middle of November. There is some chance that would happen, the sentencing.
So speaking of Trump, I've been reading a lot of stories lately about how in the past he's laid the groundwork for other things. We saw it with election fraud, right? He said before the election even happened, they're going to steal the election. He kind of, almost willed it into existence in his own mind, in a way. January 6th laid the groundwork for that. And now he's been talking a lot about that Kamala Harris's candidacy, whether it's constitutional, that she switched in after the primary voting. Is there any constitutional merit? Could Trump level any constitutional argument that she shouldn't be allowed to run for president?
No. Even his, even the people he picked for the Supreme Court, you never know. Thomas might agree with anything. And Alito, unfortunately, now has gotten to the point where, I wouldn't bet any money that he wouldn't agree with an outrageous proposition of law. Yeah. But no, this is, you have to realize that, first of all, it'd be very hard for anyone to have standing. The other thing is that, to bring it in a federal court, that particular plaintiff would have standing, even if it were Trump. I don't think that he would necessarily have standing. But the other issue in the case is just that, first of all, it's kind of a political question, how any political party handles their own nomination process. But I think that the campaign finance lawyers, the people who really know this field, would say nothing irregular happened here. He has not been nominated. Biden was called the presumptive nominee. We used to have the smoke-filled room, and the smoke-filled room would pick somebody. I remember 19, what was it, 19, when Humphrey and McGovern were in it, the same year that Bobby Kennedy got assassinated. And the nomination, bounced. It went 68. There was a big issue. It was in Chicago. Then in 72. So all of these things could be decided in the convention. And there's no issue there, Kim. If anyone can tell me what the issue they think is that he would raise, that being substituted in, and Biden could turn down the nomination. He turned down the nomination, and then the delegates are all going to go, and they're going to vote. They can vote for anyone they want to, and they're all going to vote for Harris. He doesn't have a leg to stand on this one, Trump.
Speaking of Trump, he's also decided that he's going to sue the federal government, the Department of Justice, in connection with the raid at Mar-A-Lago. He's still angry over this, suing the DOJ for $100 million. Does this go anywhere?
This goes absolutely nowhere. This is nothing but a publicity stunt. He's going to take advantage of the fact that the district judge that he picked, Cannon down there, that she threw the case out. Her decision is going to be reversed, and it's going to be the special prosecutor is not a suspect, either how the special prosecutor was picked or how the special prosecutor is deciding this case. And so there's just her decision is going to be reversed. But Trump is trying to take advantage of the fact that the Mar-A-Lago case has now been thrown out by a federal judge for the moment. And he's been so wronged. His mansion, his Mar-a-Lago has been invaded. That case will go absolutely nowhere. People say it might end up blowing up in Trump's face, as so many things have been recently, because he would be a civil case. So they can take his deposition. If he refuses to give a deposition, it'll be thrown out because he's not cooperating with his own lawsuit. If he does give a deposition, he's been terrible in depositions. The one that I love was when he said he never met E. Jean Carroll. He didn't know what she was talking about. Then, of course, there's a photograph of the two of them together. Then at the deposition, they show him the photograph and says, "Oh, beautiful, beautiful girl. Who's that, my daughter?" "No, that's the woman who you said wasn't your type, but who a jury has now found that you sexually assaulted in the dressing room at Bergdorf Goodman." So I think he may be, biting off a little more than he can chew, as he often does, and he may end up, he'll drop this lawsuit. It's just a publicity stunt. If it actually went forward, then they would take his deposition, and it would probably be a disaster for Trump to be under oath.
Let's talk about Matthew Perry for a moment. This morning in Los Angeles, we were told 5 people have been arrested in connection with providing him, allegedly, ketamine. The medical examiner in Los Angeles says it was ketamine that led to his demise. He was found face down, floating in his pool, dead at the age of 54. And now we have 2 doctors, his roommate, and somebody called the ketamine queen. And Mark sent me an email this morning saying it's interesting that these people were arrested for providing him drugs, or ketamine specifically, and that's because he was a big Hollywood star, that in normal cases, it's hard to get the drug dealer, that this might not have happened. And so can you talk a little bit about why they're bringing charges in this case and how celebrity and fame may play a role?
Well, I was a federal prosecutor, and now I've been a criminal defense attorney for some years. I do a lot of this federal practice. I know the prosecutors who just announced this. I used to work a lot with the United States Postal Inspectors. They do a very good job, and it looks like they did a very good job in this case, along with the DEA and the local police. LAPD worked on this case too. And you can't bring every case. And so the reality is, when you're in a prosecutor's office, you do want to bring cases that will really increase deterrence. So yes, there are a lot of dirty doctors in Southern California. They do stuff not only by providing controlled substances, but they do a whole lot of shenanigans and frauds with the medical systems, with cheating Obamacare, the ACA, with cheating the Medicare system, the Medi-Cal system. But they also, some of them, like the doctors allegedly did here, profiteer from having access to drugs like ketamine. and then selling it out the back door. They've had 3 people in this case, Kim, who've pleaded guilty already or agreed to
Oh,
plead
wow.
guilty. The 2 who just got charged and arrested today are this one who's styled the Ketamine Queen. They did a search of her residence, and they found allegedly methamphetamine and some other drugs. So she's been charged already. They're going to bring a superseding indictment, I think, against her to bring in these ketamine charges. And on top of that, they have this doctor that they call Dr. P, and Dr. P has been charged. I think the 2 of them have been arrested. They'll be down at the federal courthouse today having their arraignment. Their attorneys will be asking for bail. I don't know about the Ketamine Queen, especially with her prior case and what her record is, but I would imagine that the doctor, I think he's in his 40s or 50s, he probably doesn't have a criminal record, or he would have been in trouble with the medical board already, right? So he's probably a resident of the community. I would think he's someone who's definitely going to get bail.
Yeah.
And the trial probably will go in front of whichever judge was picked already, because this is a superseding indictment. Whoever has the underlying indictment would probably be the judge who'd be chosen for this case. But again, you have to make examples when you're a prosecutor. You can't charge everybody. People would love that if you could charge everybody who was really worthy of being charged for a heinous crime, like giving drugs that are illegal, and knowing, if you know that it's illegal, you know the person shouldn't have those drugs, you do it just to put money in your pocket, and then the person doesn't just have a normally bad reaction, but they die. So I think the public would like to see more of those cases indicted. You can't indict all those cases. In many cases, it's how many resources do you have to find out who was it who gave them the drugs. But when you see cases like Michael Jackson, you remember Michael Jackson?
Yeah.
That surgery drug, and his doctor went to jail, I think, for involuntary manslaughter.
Right.
There was a rapper who went to federal prison. There was a case with a baseball player. You remember, it was an Angels player, a relief pitcher, some kind of pitcher. He ended up dying, and the person who supplied him the drugs went to prison for a very long time. So those are the cases that tend to be brought. And so there's nothing like, oh, wow, they only go after celebrities. There's a reason why this case got a lot more attention. And one of the doctors has already either pleaded guilty or agreed to plead guilty. There are 2 doctors in the case. He's one of the 3 who's already pleaded or agreed to plead guilty. There was also like a Guy Friday, whatever you call it, a personal assistant to Matthew Perry, and he's also pleaded guilty. One of the reasons they have so much detail about this case is because they have insiders who are talking. That's why they're able to make the allegation that, for instance, this doctor that they just charged today actually injected Matthew Perry in a parking lot in Long Beach. Obviously, they have somebody else who knew that happened, who's saying that happened. You have to take everything with a grain of salt. Everyone's entitled to the presumption of innocence, but you have such a specific charge. They have the charge that just before Matthew Perry died, he was repeatedly injected with this ketamine, and it was illegal, Kim. He was also on a ketamine treatment, which is done for depression and anxiety. So Matthew Perry, Kim, was on that treatment, but he apparently really liked this ketamine. It became a real addiction thing, and now he's injecting it. This is way in addition. The dosage was way in addition to what he's supposed to get for the ketamine treatment. That went out of your body in a few hours. What was in his body was not something that went wrong with the prescribed ketamine treatment. It was from him getting all of this illegal ketamine and having it injected into his body.
This whole thing is so sad. So sad. Can we turn to this lawsuit? I don't know if you saw this. It's a not necessarily a lawsuit. It's Montana's top court striking down parental consent laws for minors that are seeking an abortion. The judge wrote that a minor's right to control her reproductive decision is among the most fundamental rights that she possesses, and that Montana has not shown that the law was justified to protect minors. So Montana, they're affirming the right to privacy. They're affirming the right for young women to have control over their own bodies, is what I understand. This is a red state, right?
Right. Well, the slogan of the conservatives and the libertarians, New Hampshire, were things like live free or die. live free or die. And so that was the normal conservative libertarian position, was that we have the right to do with our bodies, that the government should get off our backs, that the government shouldn't tell us what to do. And apparently all the members of the Montana Supreme Court, because this was a unanimous, kind of see the law in that context. So the fact that they are a red state and they have a Republican governor and they have a Republican Senate candidate who's trying to oust this John Tester, who seems like he's an excellent senator up there. I think that's what Trump was doing up there, trying to help that Republican Trumpy candidate against John Tester, the sitting senator who's running for re-election up there. But it seems like the Supreme Court made a decision, and that will be the law in Montana, as I say, unanimously. This is a little different from parental notification, which I think is still getting kicked around up there in the courts, or maybe through legislation. But this one was, my understanding is, in Montana, a young woman who really needs an abortion can go to a judge and ask the judge, and if the judge decides that she's met the legal standard to get an abortion, the judge can authorize it. And I guess they were trying to argue that no, that was that shouldn't be the law, that shouldn't be the case. And the Montana Supreme Court ruled unanimously that under Montana law and Montana's constitution, that was a young woman's constitutional right to go ask the judge. And if the judge agreed that she should have an abortion, that she could have one. I think that's without any notification to the parents. But generally, that's the issue that we all hear about, the notification to the parents. Don't the parents have a right to know? In some of these red states, they do have this right for the parents to know. And of course, then basically the government requires notification to the parents that the young woman doesn't want to give them, and then they can interfere with her right to control her body in many ways. And they can say, well, the parents did it, not the government did it. But if the government requires the notification that the young woman doesn't want to give, it is kind of the government doing it.
Yeah, agree. In New York, they've banned face coverings, saying the law is a way to target people committing crimes or hiding behind scarves. I'm assuming this also applies to COVID masks or, health care related masks. This happened in Nassau County. It was signed into law Wednesday, just a week after it was passed. So you can't wear a face covering in Nassau County. But they're not the only area considering this type of legislation. The Democrats, even in Los Angeles, New York City Mayor Eric Adams, New York's Governor Kathy Hochul, all considering this type of mask ban. What do you make of this? And is this constitutional? Because if I want to put on a COVID mask to protect myself, shouldn't I have the right to do that?
Well, a lot of it grows out of the pro-Palestinian demonstrations. Right. So a lot of like Jewish advocacy groups have sort of fought for that and exerted political pressure, because the argument is that there's some rally, somebody either acts very abusively or actually strikes somebody, and then you can't identify the person because they have a mask on. And I guess people are going to these demonstrations and they're doing a face covering, and the argument is that it's not for COVID. Either the type of the mask isn't like a COVID mask or
a scarf or what have you. But
exactly.
One could argue that that's a religious thing, right?
Well, it's going to be very hard to try to prove these cases. I think in general, it's going to be a misdemeanor. There's all kinds of selective enforcement, exactly what you're saying. There's also the issue on like the subways and stuff like that. You can't identify the person who, mugged you on the subway because they have a mask on. And again, I guess one of the arguments is that, let's say the police say, you can't wear that mask on the subway. And someone says, wait a second, you're telling me what to do. You're violating my rights. Presumably, this would be some directive to the police, and it would be some cover for the police when the police get sued by the ACLU, that they were acting appropriately under that statute or that guidance, because everybody was supposed to wear COVID masks, and that was its whole issue. And then it kind of got turned on its head. It's like, well, every mask that I have, including a scarf that's covering my face at a pro-Palestinian demonstration where I actually attacked a Jewish person, how much that's really happening, how much this is propaganda, on both sides. But you remember at the universities, and I covered the one out here at SC, SC and UCLA both had issues that were really fraught. They took over a building back at Columbia. The head of Columbia University, she just had to resign her
Step down.
post. And this issue, you remember, was especially around graduation ceremonies around May. This was a huge issue. And I think that's when this interest got started. I'm not sure how much this is really going to go, to go anywhere.
Okay. All right. Lastly, I know my David Katz time is running out, but they have this, the step they've taken for a pro-Trump lawyer who has gotten now kicked off of the Dominion case because she is the one that leaked the confidential information. She had access to this information and leaked it. Her name is Stephanie Lambert, and a federal judge in D.C. took this step of disqualifying her. She's an attorney in Michigan, and she's an election denier. She's a Trump person. They say she can't represent another election denier in any of these defamation suits filed by Dominion Voting Systems because she shared this and admitted to sharing this confidential discovery document. Is this expected? Has this an unprecedented thing, or is this something that you could have seen coming?
Well, this may seem a little bit inside baseball, but it's sort of a fascinating situation. What happens now is a lot of cases, especially federal cases, have a protective order. And the idea is that you shouldn't disseminate people's social security numbers. You shouldn't, their addresses, all that kind of stuff. And also details about the case. I mean, the idea is that the litigants need to know this, and the litigators, their attorneys need to know this. Sometimes even the litigants are not told it. Only the litigators, the attorneys, have access to it. And then they argue, like I argued in one of my cases. So wait a second, I need to talk to my defendant about what's in the protective order. And then they make it really clear that he's also covered by the protective order. But the allegation against her, and what the magistrate judge found against her, is that she basically entered the case just to spy on the protective order stuff. In other words, her goal in coming into the case was to get stuff covered by the protective order and then disseminate it to the world. As I understand it, she's admitted that she disseminated to the world. She's kind of proud of the fact. And people might say, well, wait a second, I want government in the sunshine. I want all this stuff disseminated. Isn't she a hero? Isn't she like the guy, who was the guy in Australia? Wasn't she like a whistleblower who told the world the truth?
Oh, Julian Assange?
Julian Assange. But the federal courts have to operate. I can't speak that much about the state courts. I imagine they have the same arguments. The federal courts have to operate on the fact that you're an attorney, you're held to a higher standard, you have to obey the order of this court. There are things that are going to be disclosed in this case for justice's sake that you have to be able to review to defend your client, and to then abuse that and violate the protective order. I think from what I've heard about the case, she was lucky that the only sanction that she's been hit with so far, the only punishment, is that she's been not allowed to represent her client in that case, or maybe in similar kinds of cases. And the client that she came into the case for is, I understand it, the Overstock guy. And the Overstock guy is in a world of trouble himself. Now his lawyer is in a world of trouble. There may yet be another shoe to fall off her foot, because it sounds to me like what she did is really beyond the pale for any attorney.
It sounds criminal, is it?
It could be criminal. It could be punished as criminal contempt. It could also be, they could maybe appoint a lawyer because sometimes in these criminal contempts, they don't want the judge. If you say to the judge the F word in the judge's face, the judge can punish you for criminal contempt. If it's not directly in the presence of the judge, a lot of times they appoint like a special prosecutor. So it's not you and the judge fighting, it's the special prosecutor fighting. But what you're fighting about is the fact that you were in criminal contempt of a judge's order. The judge told you, don't disseminate that stuff. You also sign a paper before you get it, agreeing that you will not disseminate it and that you're subject to punishment. So you do. And as I say, we lawyers have lots and lots of disagreements, but this is not one that people have a lot of disagreements about. You enter a case, you sign a protective order, you say you won't disseminate stuff, and then you ballyhoo to the world. Ha ha, I violated the order, I told everybody. She apparently has her own problems. So I think her argument is going to be she kind of needed this stuff. But it sounds like her best argument is that this is the kind of self-help that you're not entitled to. Go defend yourself, but not by
No.
coming into a case and getting secret documents and then, disseminating them. It sounds like she's just totally out of line on this.
Lastly, there's an antitrust case against Google. They're talking about splitting this company up, maybe taking Chrome this way, YouTube this way. I don't know. Is it possible to split up a company like Google? Is that what we're looking at? And what does that look like?
Sure, there would be ways to split up Google, and they would have, the one function that they do, but then they do a lot of self-dealing. That's the allegation, and so you would split them up in a way that they couldn't self-deal. And there are different functions that a company does, and the idea is that you would make one of them very competitive because you wouldn't allow Google to participate in that field, the field that they're trying to control. And a federal judge has looked at this, heard all the arguments of the facts and the law, and said Google is a monopolist and is using its monopoly power to suppress competition and to gouge the public and to gouge others for higher prices. And that's exactly what the antitrust laws are designed to not do. And, sometimes people think it's a Democratic issue, but the antitrust laws, the trust buster, was the famous Republican, Teddy Roosevelt. And the Republicans were into this. And the reason the Republicans were into this decade after decade is because small business gets crushed. You say 90% of small business people vote Republican. Well, this is a real Republican issue, not having the Googles of the world gouge them and knock their companies out of business. They really hurt small and middle-sized business. So this should be a bipartisan cause to do something. I mean, Google has 90% of the market. If that's not a monopoly position, 90% of the market, 90% of the people go on the internet through Google. And the reason is because they pay billions of dollars to Apple and other companies like that. So when you buy an Apple phone, you very easily search the internet by going on Google. And if you try to do it any other way, you have to really understand the phone and a lot more technology than people do. So by paying billions of dollars, they maintain this monopoly position. Why are they paying billions of dollars to Apple? Except that Apple puts them first and easy to get on the Apple devices.
So they're talking about maybe divesting the Android a part of the operation, divesting the Chrome part of the operation. So all these little things that make up Google, could they all be separated out?
Sure. I mean, they did that. They did that with the phone company, and
AT&T,
which had a monopoly.
Yeah.
They did it with the phone company, which had a monopoly, and we've had this flourishing of technology. We've had all of these advances. The world that we live in now with these smartphones and everything else, I don't think that would have been possible if AT&T and the phone company had been able to maintain their monopoly. They were broken up, and everyone said at the time, the sky is falling, this will be awful, and it wasn't awful. It was a great improvement. And as I say, a judge decided this, a very serious judge, after hearing a lot of arguments about it. So I don't think people should think that the judge is all wet. I think they should think that Google and its arguments are all wet, and let's figure out how to make this more competitive for everyone's good, except Google's.
David Katz, our famous lawyer and our favorite lawyer, former federal prosecutor, now a defense attorney in Los Angeles. David Katz, I look forward to our visits every week.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.